The scent of freshly cut grass used to be the dominant fragrance in Maplewood Heights, Ohio. A gentle green balm that settled over the neatly manicured lawns and quiet cul-de-sacs. Silas Croft, 48 years old, had cultivated a particular fondness for that scent, a simple pleasure in a life I'd intentionally kept uncomplicated. My townhouse, a modest two-story affair, was my sanctuary, a place where the hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of crickets were the loudest sounds, a rhythm that suited my observant and somewhat cynical nature. I prided myself on my self-sufficiency, my independence, and my ability to create a pocket of peace in a world that often felt chaotically inclined. My mornings were a ritual. Strong coffee, the local paper spread across the kitchen counter, and the quiet satisfaction of the sunrise filtering through the blinds. This routine, solid and predictable, was the bedrock of my day, allowing me to observe the world from a detached, analytical perspective, free from immediate emotional entanglement. I'd seen enough of humanity's foibles to be inherently distrustful of easy answers, and my cynicism, honed over decades, often proved to be a reliable shield. Yet beneath that surface, I harbored a quiet disdain for hypocrisy, a deep-seated aversion to those who, rather than face uncomfortable truths about themselves or their own, chose to deflect, to blame, to twist reality until it suited their convenient narrative. I'd always found a strange, almost twisted satisfaction in watching, or sometimes subtly orchestrating situations where the truth, ugly and inconvenient, inevitably came to light. This was less about vengeance and more about an almost academic pursuit of natural justice, a belief that the world, when sufficiently nudged, would always self-correct. The disruption began subtly, almost imperceptibly, a faint wisp of something acrid, something cloying, mingling with the fresh air I so cherished. It wasn't my doing. Truth be told, I had on occasion indulged in a bit of wacky tobacco on my back deck in the evenings, a quiet unwind after a long day of numbers and spreadsheets. But I was always discreet, always mindful of my neighbors, and the notion that the faint scent from a single, quiet session could linger, thick and pungent, until the morning struck me as utterly preposterous. Still, when the email from the landlord landed in my inbox, a polite yet firm reminder that no marijuana is to be smoked on the property, citing complaints of a pot smell that starts in the evening and lingers until the morning, I didn't hesitate. I was a man of principles, one of which was respecting communal living spaces. I immediately moved my consumption off the property entirely, vowing to find a more isolated spot for my occasional indulgence. No problem, I thought. Problem solved. My peace, I assumed, was secure. This initial brush with neighborly conflict was merely an inconvenience, a minor tremor in my otherwise placid existence, yet it sowed the first seeds of curiosity, a low thrum of anticipation that something more might be brewing. What exactly was causing that lingering smell, if it wasn't me? A couple of days after the landlord's email, as I was retrieving my mail, I saw her, Karen. She lived in the townhouse directly adjacent to mine, a neat, unassuming woman with a perpetually pleasant, if somewhat brittle, smile. Her expression today was as friendly as ever, her voice a chipper "Hello, Silas," as she adjusted a stray vine on her porch. This seemed like the perfect opportunity to address the matter directly, to extend the hand of a reasonable neighbor. My philosophy had always been that direct communication could preempt a multitude of unnecessary conflicts. "Karen," I began, stepping closer, holding out my phone. "Listen, about that landlord email regarding the smell." Her smile faltered just for a moment, a barely perceptible flicker, but then it snapped back into place. "Oh yes, that's such a nuisance." "Precisely," I agreed, pushing forward. "Look, I wanted to be proactive. If you ever have any issues with me, anything at all, I'd really appreciate it if you came to me directly first before going to the landlord. My number's right here." I waited, holding the phone out, expecting her to take it, to perhaps exchange numbers, to establish that neighborly line of communication I valued so highly. It was an olive branch, offered with genuine intent to foster goodwill. The small promise here was mutual respect and open dialogue. She hesitated, her gaze darting from my phone to my face, then down to her hands, which were now fidgeting with her gardening gloves. A peculiar tightness began to form in my chest, a low hum of unease that my observant nature immediately registered. This was not the smooth, reciprocal interaction I had anticipated. "Also," I continued, pressing on, determined to clear the air entirely, "just so you know, any wacky tobacco consumption on my part has been moved off the property completely, so that won't be a problem going forward, I assure you." I offered a small, reassuring smile, feeling a sense of quiet accomplishment. I'd done my part. The situation was resolved, or so I thought. Then the shift. It was subtle at first, a tightening around her eyes, a hardening of her jawline. Her smile, previously brittle, shattered into a grimace. Her voice, which had been light and amiable, dropped several octaves, coated in a sudden thick layer of anger. "My basement still smells like pot," she snapped, the words cutting through the pleasant afternoon air. "Even this morning it smells like pot. It's utterly unbearable." Her finger, sharp and accusatory, shot out, pointing directly at me, as if I were the embodiment of all her olfactory woes. A strange wave washed over me, a mix of genuine relief and a peculiar, almost disbelieving amusement. Relief, because her vehemence confirmed what I had already suspected, that the complaint wasn't even truly about me. Amusement, because the sheer illogicality of her accusation was beginning to dawn on me. "If your basement smells this morning," I calmly reasoned, a slight smile tugging at the corner of my lips, "and it's apparently coming from my house, why don't you just come inside and smell? It must absolutely reek in my house if the smell is strong enough to come down the pipes all the way to your basement." She recoiled as if I'd suggested she enter a den of actual vipers. Her eyes, suddenly wide and alarmed, darted around, avoiding my direct gaze. "No," she stammered, her voice thin. "No, I don't need to. I know where it's coming from. It's coming from your house, Silas, down the pipes." The absurdity hung heavy in the air, a comedic veil over a rapidly darkening reality. My patience, a finite resource, was beginning to thin. This wasn't about the smell anymore. This was about something else, something deeper, something far more irritating. I silently urged anyone listening, subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. Perhaps someone out there knew how to deal with this particular brand of delusion. Her tirade continued, fueled by some invisible, irrational wellspring of indignation. "And that basement," she went on, her voice rising in pitch, "that's our den, our cozy hangout spot. That's where my teenagers hang out. I can't have it smelling like pot down there." It was then, in that moment, that my cynicism truly flared, illuminating the scene with a harsh, unforgiving light. A basement den, teenagers, a lingering pot smell, and her furious finger pointing at me, the innocent upstairs neighbor, rather than even considering the obvious. I truly had to work hard not to burst out laughing right there, a loud, derisive snort that would have shattered the fragile civility of the moment. The sheer, unadulterated cluelessness, or perhaps the willful ignorance, was breathtaking. To smell cannabis in your own teenager's hangout space, and then to call the landlord on your neighbor, rather than even talk to your own flesh and blood, or conduct even a rudimentary investigation within your own four walls. It was a masterclass in deflection. A textbook example of avoiding uncomfortable truths about one's own family by projecting blame onto an unsuspecting external party. This was precisely the kind of hypocrisy that curdled my stomach and ignited a cold, calculated desire for resolution. My emotional state had shifted from mild annoyance to a deep, unsettling frustration. The promise of peace had been shattered not by the actual nuisance, but by the sheer, unbridled audacity of Karen's blame game. This wouldn't simply be about stopping a smell. It would be about exposing a truth. A new question formed in my mind. How far would Karen go to maintain this absurd charade, and how exactly would I dismantle it? Karen's refusal to step inside, her rigid adherence to her fantastical pipes theory, and her subsequent avoidance of me became the new, uncomfortable normal. She wouldn't meet my gaze if we crossed paths on the street, her lips pursed in a permanent scowl, her head held high as if warding off some invisible, pervasive evil. The peace I had painstakingly cultivated began to fray at the edges, not from the lingering phantom smell, but from the insidious creep of her unreasonable malice. It was a subtle, psychological warfare, a constant, low-level hum of animosity that chipped away at my serenity. I found myself increasingly observant, my eyes and ears tuned to the rhythms of her household, searching for patterns, for anomalies. My cynicism, usually a passive lens through which I viewed the world, began to sharpen into an active tool. I noticed the comings and goings of her teenagers, a boy who seemed permanently attached to his oversized headphones, and a girl with a perpetually bored expression. They often entered or exited through a side door that led directly to their basement, their cozy hangout spot. I watched as a succession of their friends, equally scruffy and nonchalant, trooped in and out, usually in the evenings, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The very same time, coincidentally, that the mysterious pot smell was supposed to begin. The irony was not lost on me. It was, in fact, infuriating. My initial attempts at resolution had been direct, open, and utterly futile. Now, faced with Karen's unyielding refusal to engage with reality, my approach had to shift. Politeness had been met with obstinacy, reason with irrationality. The landlord, for their part, had sent one reminder email, but hadn't escalated beyond that, likely because my quick cessation of my own habits had removed my culpability. But the complaint was still active, still hanging over my head, even if unsubstantiated. I needed proof, not just for myself, but to dismantle Karen's narrative entirely. My first step was documentation, meticulous and obsessive. I began keeping a detailed log, dates, times, and the direction of the wind when I thought I caught a faint whiff of cannabis. I noted Karen's behavior, the moment she would glare, the times she'd abruptly turn away. It felt almost comical, like preparing for a lawsuit over a phantom odor, but the gnawing frustration propelled me forward. I installed a small, discreet security camera pointed at the shared walkway between our townhouses, ostensibly for general security, but secretly to capture the comings and goings of her teenagers and their friends. My resourceful nature was stirring, pulling me away from passive observation into active data collection. Then came the subtle probing, my attempt to gauge the wider neighborhood's perception. I struck up conversations with other neighbors, casually steering the topic towards general neighborhood concerns, subtly dropping in questions about unusual smells or recent complaints. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet, elderly woman across the street, mentioned a recurring skunky odor that sometimes drifted over, especially in the evenings. She frowned. I thought it was perhaps the compost heap, dear, but it's rather distinct. My lips twitched. Distinct, indeed. She, too, had heard about the landlord's warning, but assumed it had all cleared up. No one seemed to suspect Karen or her basement. The depth of Karen's deflection, her ability to sow doubt and shift blame, was truly remarkable and sickening. The problem, the actual undeniable pot smell, continued to emanate from somewhere, likely the infamous basement tenant below me, or more damningly, from Karen's own teenager's den. The smell, sometimes faint, sometimes undeniably present, became a constant torment, a low-frequency hum that vibrated through my otherwise quiet life. It wasn't just the smell itself, but what it represented, Karen's unyielding, illogical blame, a festering wound in the side of my peaceful existence. My sleep became fractured. I'd wake in the middle of the night, convinced I smelled it, even if it was just my imagination, a phantom of my increasingly stressed mind. My morning coffee, once a sacred ritual, became a bitter prelude to another day of vigilance. My mental well-being was taking a hit, and with it my patience frayed thinner and thinner. One Tuesday morning, the situation escalated from passive-aggressive avoidance to overt aggression. I stepped out to collect my newspaper and found my pristine lawn littered with empty fast food wrappers, soda cans, and a crumpled bag that distinctly smelled of cheap tobacco. My jaw tightened. This wasn't accidental litter. This was deliberate. My eyes immediately went to Karen's yard, then to her door. No one, but the security camera footage, would tell the tale. It was a deliberate provocation, a tangible act of disrespect, and it ignited a spark of cold fury deep within me. My disillusionment with Karen had now cemented into a burning indignation. This was no longer just about a smell, it was about outright harassment. The stakes were rising, and I knew with chilling certainty that this would not end until the truth, however ugly, was laid bare. I needed a new strategy, one that transcended mere documentation. This called for something more orchestrated. I felt a surge of rage, but it was a quiet, controlled rage, the kind that sharpens the mind rather than blurs it. The audience must feel the outrage, the helplessness I was experiencing. The landlord, bless their heart, was a busy person, dealing with multiple properties and tenants. My follow-up emails about the continued smell, now coupled with the blatant littering, were met with polite assurances, but no immediate action. "We'll look into it, Sealers," was the general gist, a bureaucratic shrug. They had, after all, already addressed the initial complaint. They probably viewed me as overly sensitive or simply another complaining tenant. This institutional inaction only fueled my resolve. If they wouldn't help, I would find another way. My focus shifted from merely proving my innocence to actively proving Karen's complicity in the cover-up, or at least her willful blindness. My resourceful trait kicked into high gear. I started researching local ordinances, landlord-tenant laws, and more specifically, the rules regarding nuisance complaints and environmental health. Maplewood Heights, like many suburban towns, had specific guidelines about noxious odors and property maintenance. I was building a case, piece by painstaking piece, not for a court of law, but for the court of public opinion, and more importantly, for the specific attention of certain key players. The coming down the pipes accusation continued to gnaw at me. It was absurd, but it was Karen's chosen narrative. I considered the physics of it. Townhouses shared walls, but plumbing systems were typically independent, or at least compartmentalized. Could a smell truly travel like that? It sparked an idea, a nascent plan forming in the back of my mind. If she insisted on the pipes narrative, then perhaps the pipes could be made to deliver a very different kind of truth. The trash incidents escalated. Not daily, but with enough regularity to be a constant low-level menace. More food wrappers, empty juice boxes, even discarded cigarette butts, all suspiciously appearing on my side of the property line, always after dark. My security camera, now a silent, unblinking witness, captured shadowy figures, usually after the streetlights came on, casually tossing items from Karen's side onto mine. The figures were often indistinct, obscured by angle and light, but the timing and the general youthful appearance strongly suggested Karen's teenagers. I compiled these clips, tagging them with dates and times, a growing dossier of petty vandalism. This wasn't just frustration anymore, it was an active assault on my home, my peace, my very sanity. My anger was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The audience, I hoped, was feeling the same outrage. I also began to notice an uptick in the general noise levels from Karen's house, especially from the basement. Loud music, muffled shouts, sudden bursts of laughter, all contributing to the erosion of my quiet evenings. It felt like a deliberate act, a way to further needle me, or perhaps simply the uninhibited behavior of teenagers whose parents were too busy blaming others to supervise them properly. Every slamming door, every bass thud was another tiny chip off my sanity. This was my rock bottom, a profound moment of emotional exhaustion. I felt utterly trapped, cornered by a neighbor who seemed determined to make my life miserable, all while clinging to a ridiculous lie. My methodical nature, my patience, my very belief in reason were being tested to their absolute limits. The despair was palpable, a heavy cloak I couldn't shake. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that if I didn't take decisive action, I would lose myself in the depths of this petty war. This was the catalyst. It was time for Silas Croft, the disillusioned observer, to become the meticulous orchestrator of truth. I just hoped people would subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily and see how this played out. My rise from rock bottom wasn't a sudden, dramatic burst of energy, but a cold, calculated hardening of resolve. My customary cynicism, previously a passive filter, transformed into a potent weapon, a lens through which I would meticulously dissect Karen's hypocrisy and engineer its downfall. The problem was no longer just the smell, or the trash, or the noise. It was the deliberate deflection, the refusal to acknowledge the obvious truth, and the willingness to demonize an innocent neighbor rather than confront uncomfortable realities within her own household. My motivation, to expose this specific brand of adult blame-shifting, burned with an icy intensity. The coming down the pipes theory was Karen's hill to die on, and I decided to help her get there. If she believed her basement was intrinsically linked to my house's plumbing, then I would make that perceived connection her undoing. This required a certain level of subtle manipulation, a careful planting of seeds that would germinate into undeniable proof. My plan wasn't about direct confrontation, which I knew would be useless against someone as entrenched in their delusion as Karen. It was about creating an undeniable, self-incriminating narrative that she and others would eventually have to face. Step 1 involved discreet observation of Karen's teenagers. My security camera, now a valuable ally, continued to record their nocturnal activities. I noted the specific friends who frequented the basement den, their general demeanor, and most importantly, the patterns of the lingering smell. It was strongest on Friday and Saturday nights, tapering off by Sunday morning. The timing perfectly aligned with adolescent weekend gatherings, a pattern Karen somehow refused to acknowledge. Next, I focused on the pipes. My townhouse shared a wall with Karen's, but our plumbing was distinct. However, the shared foundation, the crawl spaces, the very ground beneath our feet were not. A complex web of shared underground utilities for water and sewer lines ran beneath both properties, standard for townhouses. It was highly improbable that pot smoke could travel up my drains and down hers, as her fantasy suggested, but what if the source of the smell was indeed below ground, or very close to it, and simply pervasive? What if the smell was so strong in Karen's basement, as she claimed, that it indicated a far more significant issue than a stray whiff from my deck? My resourcefulness truly came into play here. I began researching professional air quality testing, not for my house, but hypothetically for a neighbor concerned about indoor air quality. I learned about specialized equipment that could detect volatile organic compounds, VOCs, including those associated with cannabis. This was an expensive route, but my motivation to expose Karen's hypocrisy, to restore true peace, outweighed the financial consideration. This wouldn't be about proving my innocence directly to Karen. It would be about compelling her to face the truth, even if I had to lead the donkey to water. The core of my plan revolved around leveraging the landlord and, if necessary, the health department, but in a way that led them directly to the truth without me explicitly accusing Karen's children. My role was to be the disillusioned observer who subtly exposed the hypocrisy. This meant making the truth so glaringly obvious that it couldn't be ignored, even by Karen. I started by sending the landlord a polite but increasingly firm email. I acknowledged their previous communication, reaffirmed my compliance, and then with meticulous detail described the continued presence of the distinct odor, noting its consistent pattern, evening through morning, primarily on weekends. I carefully refrained from accusing anyone, but I alluded to the fact that the odor persisted despite my cessation of smoking. I included a small snippet from my camera, strategically chosen to show just the trash being thrown onto my lawn without identifying the thrower. The goal was to paint a picture of ongoing nuisance, not just a one-off issue. The landlord, as expected, sent another polite but non-committal response. "We understand your concerns, Silas. We will continue to monitor the situation." They were still trying to avoid direct intervention. This was precisely what I needed. It confirmed they wouldn't act decisively unless compelled. My next move was riskier but necessary. I discreetly obtained a small, highly sensitive air quality monitor, the kind that could detect specific airborne particles and even some VOCs. I wasn't going to use it to snoop directly. Instead, I carefully placed it for a few nights in the common exterior space between my townhouse and Karen's, near her basement access. I disguised it as a fancy outdoor thermometer mounted on a small garden stake. My observant eye had noted her casual disregard for privacy in outdoor areas. The data it collected was not admissible evidence, but it provided crucial intel, consistent spikes in cannabis-related VOCs, precisely during the times Karen claimed the smell was present in her basement. The evidence was mounting, silent, and irrefutable. The final piece of the puzzle involved a carefully timed action. I knew Karen claimed the smell came down the pipes. I also knew that her teenagers frequented their basement den, often with friends, late into the evening. I needed a way to make the connection irrefutable without being the one to point the finger. My resourcefulness led me to a rather unusual, yet perfectly legal, solution. I visited a specialist store that sold industrial-grade non-toxic smoke tracers for plumbing inspections. These tracers, when introduced into a plumbing system, would emit a distinctive, often colorful, smoke to detect leaks or blockages. They were designed to travel through pipes and exit at points of failure or ventilation. The key was that they were visible, harmless, and unmistakable. My plan was simple, yet subtly devastating. I waited for a Friday evening, the peak time for Karen's teenagers' den activities, according to my meticulous observations. I waited until I knew Karen herself was likely home, perhaps relaxing in her living room, her guard down. Under the cover of dusk, I applied the tracer, a specially formulated variety designed to travel through shared utility lines and vent through any connected points, including basement drains or outdoor cleanouts. I specifically targeted the exterior access point of my main sewer line, knowing it connected to the broader municipal system that bordered Karen's property. The instructions indicated it would create a noticeable, yet harmless, plume. The beauty of this was its ambiguity. If it vented from my property, it showed my pipes were clear. If it vented from hers, it meant her pipes were connected or open somewhere. My goal wasn't to blame the pipes, but to create a spectacle that would force a different kind of attention. I then made a pre-scheduled, casual call to the landlord, expressing my ongoing concern about the mystery odor, and oh, by the way, I was having some routine plumbing checks done on my main line because of an unrelated, very minor gurgling sound I'd noticed. I mentioned that the plumbers might use a tracer to ensure everything was clear. This was my strategic plant, preparing the ground for the proof. That evening, as I anticipated, a plume of a faint, almost ghostly blue-tinged smoke began to emanate, not from my house, nor from the main sewer cleanout on the street, but from an old, rusted drain vent positioned at the back of Karen's property, directly above her basement's exterior wall. It was visible, unmistakable, and completely harmless. The smoke was subtle enough not to be alarming, but distinct enough to draw attention. It drifted gently upward, then dispersed into the night air, carrying with it a silent, undeniable message. It was a visual representation of a leak in her own system, not mine. The following morning, Saturday, the true chaos began. I heard a furious shout from Karen's yard, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Peeking through my blinds, I saw her, red-faced, pointing frantically at the dissipating blue residue on her drain vent. She was on the phone, clearly distraught. Her teenagers, looking disheveled, emerged from the basement side door, rubbing their eyes, then quickly retreated as their mother's voice rose to a shrill crescendo. Later that morning, the landlord's property manager arrived, looking harried, accompanied by a genuine plumber. They went directly to Karen's house, not mine. I observed from my window, a quiet smile playing on my lips. Karen, still visibly agitated, was gesturing wildly at the vent, her accusations clearly flowing freely. The property manager, a patient but firm man named Mark, seemed to be taking notes, his expression one of weary understanding. The plumber, meanwhile, examined the vent, then took a long, slow sniff. His head turned, almost imperceptibly, towards the side door leading to Karen's basement, then back to the vent. He cleared his throat. I watched as the three of them entered Karen's house. I imagined the conversation taking place within, the undeniable visual evidence of the blue tracer, and the lingering, ever-present scent of pot that Karen had so vehemently and falsely attributed to me. My role as the disillusioned observer was complete. I had set the stage. The truth, ugly and inconvenient, was now performing for its rightful audience. A few hours later, I saw Mark, the property manager, emerge from Karen's house, looking grim. He walked towards his car, and for a moment our eyes met. He didn't say anything, but he gave me a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement that he now understood. The nod was my first sweet taste of vindication. The consequences were swift and deeply satisfying. That same afternoon, I saw a new face at Karen's house, an older, distinguished-looking man, presumably her husband, arriving with a briefcase and an expression of profound displeasure. There was a long, loud, and clearly acrimonious discussion in their living room, punctuated by occasional shouts from the basement level. The shouts were punctuated by the muffled thud of what sounded like objects being thrown, a domestic drama unfolding for the entire neighborhood to observe, if they were so inclined. My cynicism found a twisted pleasure in the inevitable unraveling of her carefully constructed facade. Over the next few days, the loud music from Karen's basement ceased entirely. The parade of teenage friends dwindled to nothing. The littering on my lawn stopped. And miraculously, the lingering pot smell in the evenings disappeared. The peace I had sought, the quiet I cherished, slowly began to reclaim my home. I learned, through subtle neighborhood whispers and a carefully worded email from the landlord a week later, that the basement tenant was indeed Karen's eldest son, home from college, along with his younger sister and their friends, who had been actively using the den as their personal, unsupervised smokehouse. The blue smoke, though harmless, had been the definitive evidence the landlord needed of some issue within Karen's property that was causing a nuisance, prompting them to demand a professional assessment of her internal air quality. The assessment, predictably, found high levels of cannabis compounds, leading to an undeniable confrontation within Karen's family. The landlord, now fully aware of the true source, had informed Karen that any further complaints about the smell originating from my unit would be dismissed, and that she was now responsible for ensuring her property did not cause a nuisance to her neighbors. Karen stopped smiling at me or even acknowledging my existence. Her face, whenever I saw it, was a mask of furious resentment. She avoided eye contact completely, her gaze fixed rigidly ahead, as if the very sight of me might cause her carefully constructed world to crumble further. Her teenagers now looked sullen, no longer venturing outside with their previous nonchalance. The silence from her house, once a minor annoyance, had been replaced by a palpable, almost suffocating tension. My peace had returned, but it was a peace bought at a price, a chilling reminder of the lengths to which some people would go to avoid uncomfortable truths. I had achieved my objective. The hypocrisy was exposed, the blame redirected to its rightful source, and the truth, however painful for Karen, had come to light. My satisfaction was profound, a quiet triumph of observation and orchestration over willful delusion. It solidified my belief that sometimes the most effective way to address conflict isn't through direct confrontation, but through the careful, almost surgical application of inconvenient truths. As I sat on my back deck one evening, enjoying the cool, clean air, the gentle chirping of crickets, and the comforting silence that once again enveloped my home, I reflected on the entire ordeal. The neighborhood, once a simple backdrop to my life, now felt like a complex ecosystem with hidden currents and unspoken rules. I had played my part, nudged the system, and watched it correct itself. The quiet disdain for hypocrisy I harbored had been sated for now. It was a strange, solitary kind of victory, one that left me with an even deeper understanding of human nature's intricate dance between truth and denial. And as the last vestiges of twilight faded, casting long shadows across the now peaceful lawn, a thought drifted into my mind, a final, almost whimsical suggestion. Subscribe to Neighbors from Hell channel for new Neighbors from Hell stories daily.